Okay, I have the SIG 10K Gen 2 rangefinder binoculars here and the 8K Gen 2 rangefinder. I'm going to go through the settings and some setup and things that I like to make sure to check and change and things that I don't worry about, and go through all the settings and try to explain them as best I can so you can set up your rangefinder to the best of its ability. This video I'm going to go through the settings on the 8K. So same on both these, they both have a range and a mode button. Range button's on top here, the mode button's on the side of the 8K. I'm just gonna hit it to turn it on and then press the mode button for a couple seconds. It's gonna bring up my settings list. So the first setting, I have range modes. So there's a series of modes here. BDX Elite is the one that I use all the time, probably the one that most people are going to use. That is if you program your gun into the BDX app and then transfer it to the rangefinder, it is going to use that data plus the onboard sensors for environmental conditions that are on board of this rangefinder itself. And to clarify one thing real quick, you set the whole thing up with the BDX app and then transfer those ballistics over to your rangefinder. But in the field, you do not have to have your phone at all. So that is BDX Elite. BDX External is if you're going to connect it to like a Kestrel that is going to be running the ballistics through the Kestrel and probably a wind meter and other things like that. You go through External. I've never used it. And then the next two, you have AMR and LOS. If you do either one of those modes, you're not going to get your ballistic solution. It's just going to give you your range, and the AMR is actual measured range, which is going to take into account your, if you're shooting up or down, your angle. And then LOS is just simply line of sight. And then below that you have archery mode. With archery mode, your arrow speed, you need to put your arrow speed to the nearest, it adjusts by 5 feet per second increments. I'm gonna go back and then I'm using the mode button to toggle and the rangefinder button to select. So I'm gonna toggle down to ballistic profiles next. And that is gonna give me the profiles that I have added into this rangefinder. So in my BDX app, I can have a whole catalog of guns that I have and ballistics and maybe guns that are, set up for different weights of bullets, whatever. But if I only want to have 3 of them in this rangefinder, I can only put 3 of them in the rangefinder. Or if I want to put 10 of them in here, I can put 10 of them in. It's really up to you and customizable. The really cool thing about the display that's in these rangefinders, it's called an active matrix OLED display, and it lets you customize. It's kind of like the display on your cell phone. So you can type out things that you want instead of like the standard OLED displays where you will see in your ballistics, you'll see gun 1, gun 2, gun 3, and then you have to remember which profile you put in gun 1 or gun 2. This way you can name them whatever you want, and it's really easy to switch between them. The next two are wind speed and wind direction, and I have a little philosophy on this, if you will. So I always keep my wind speed set at 10 miles an hour and my wind direction at a true crosswind, right to left or left to right. With that 10 miles an hour, if we have a 5 mile an hour wind, I can look at the adjustment that it gives me in the rangefinder, and if we have a 5 mile an hour wind, I can take that value and I can cut it in half. Because it gave me it for a 10, it's a 5, I'm going to cut that value in half. Same if it's over. If it's a 20 mile an hour wind, I can take that value and just double it. In my opinion, like you can still, if you have a lot of time or you're shooting competition or something like that and you have a wind meter, a lot of times in hunting situations, I feel like you don't. So I want to, and some of that is just going to come with practice and being able to somewhat read the wind and get an idea for value. But in the end, your wind adjustments are, they're calculated guesses, and we're trying to get as close as we can, but there's gusts in there and there's wind differences between here and your target and in between. So I have found that just doing 10 miles an hour at a direct crosswind, I can adjust it from there. All right, then below that is target mode, and these are going to optimize the way that the rangefinder is picking up the range that's being reflected back to it. The first one in here is last target, and I use that one quite a bit, especially when I'm archery hunting. A lot of times you're barely peeking up over the hill and trying to range an antelope because you don't want it to see you, and it might be at 50 yards, but there's grass in between you and it at 6 yards. I don't want my rangefinder to tell me that the range is 6 yards because that's not right. I want it to pick up the last thing the beam hit, which is probably going to be the antelope, and then send it back to me. So that's a good mode to use when you're shooting through grass. First target, take last target and flip it backwards. I don't use that one at all, really. And then you have best target. That's the one I'm usually on unless I'm archery hunting, and then I change it to last target. And then you have extended range. That optimizes it for extreme ranges, like this thing technically is rated for 8,000 yards. And then fog. If we do have fog, like sometimes in December we'll have some fog, I will flip over to it because anything helps, but I don't use that one a whole lot. I use best and last the most. Next you have display brightness. You can adjust the brightness as you want. There's also an auto adjust. That is what I use, is an auto adjust, but there are 9 total settings. And then reticle selection. So you can change what the reticle looks like that you're getting your range off of. So circle, duplex, square, and then you have a grid. And you can turn that off, which I always have mine off, or you could put full or half grid. Okay, the next one, unit of measurement. I think this is one that you absolutely need to check. And that is just making sure that your units in the rangefinder match what is going to be in your app or match your surroundings. Like, we're used to saying yards. You want to make sure that it's not set in meters, basically. So we've got distance, it's set in yards, not meters. Temperature is Fahrenheit, not Celsius. Wind is in miles per hour. Density altitude is feet. And then my velocity, I want all that stuff to be imperial. So we're in the US. If you're in another country, then obviously adjust that stuff to fit. And then feature settings. So Bluetooth, if you're going to talk to your phone, to set all this stuff up, you're going to want to have your Bluetooth on. And then you're going to want to have your Bluetooth always enabled too if you like have a BDX scope. I don't use the BDX scope that much, so if I wanted to, I could load all my stuff in and then disable the Bluetooth, but I would just leave it on. And then density altitude. Make sure that that is enabled, because that's just another thing that your rangefinder is going to use to calculate your ballistics. And then battery saver, that's just going to put a timer. Next one, startup logo. There's just a 6 hour startup logo that says 8K on it, KILO8K. I have that off, so it just goes to my rangefinder faster. And then signal meter, I have that off as well. The signal meter, it's a little meter that every time the signal comes back, it'll adjust how strong it thinks the signal is. I don't find that useful. It's just adds something else to the display, so I keep that off. Compass, this is a digital compass on board, like at really long distances, like the Coriolis effect, the Earth spinning at really long distances, that can adjust your impact, and so it needs to know what direction you're facing to be able to calculate for that. And then onboard sensors, I would look at this and make sure it's set to auto. If your temperature gets set to manual, and let's say you're actually shooting and you set it to 75 degrees if you're shooting in 75 degree weather, but then you go down to 30 degree weather, your rangefinder still manually says it's at 75, your point of impact is going to be not exact. So have that set to auto, and then that's it, going through the rangefinder. Going through real quick the display, I just want to point a couple things out. So you have your range, where it's going to give you your range. That is your that's actually a line of sight range. So from that, in the top left corner, you will also see another range that has AMR behind it. That is your actual measured range, and that's taking into account the angle that you were shooting at, and that is actually what your ballistics are calculated off of, is that AMR reading. Just something to keep in mind there, but it gives you your range, and then it gives you what you need to dial to. And then I've got the windage right beside that, and then I've got feet per second at that distance, and I've got foot-pounds of energy at that distance. Then I have my compass angle that I'm shooting at. Density altitude is also on there. That is basically a rundown of the display. It is kind of a lot of information, but it's also information that is really good to be able to look at. All right, so now pairing it up to my BDX app. So I'm just gonna go in my phone, select my BDX app. First thing I'm gonna wanna go to the top is pairing. And there are two different ways you can do this in the device setups, but I like to go to the bottom of the setup wizard. It's just more of a step-by-step, kind of easier to look at. And it's gonna say pair rangefinder, and my rangefinder is already on and is actually already paired, but if it wasn't, it would come up right below select rangefinder. You would hit that and then you'd say done. In this main screen, in the very top right corner, there is a little gear icon. And I want to check that and look at the settings of the BDX app as a whole, and make sure that it all jives with what I just changed in my rangefinder. Okay, now secondary effects. Aerodynamic jump, Coriolis effect, that is the curve or the earth turning, and then spin drift. Spin drift, so your bullet's spinning out there. It has a right-hand twist on it. It's spinning out there. As it gets further and further in distance, it's going to start going the direction that it's spinning eventually. So it takes into effect that spin drift. Those two things, I'm like, why not have them on and have it at least make, I mean, the adjustments it's going to make for it at the ranges we're going to be hunting is like very minute, but might as well if we have it. So after I've gone through those settings, the main settings, next one I have is custom profiles. We're going to revisit that in a second. Then below that is rangefinders. So the rangefinders is connecting to the rangefinder, and it is going to give us data. The same data that is in our rangefinder is going to just show us on our phone, and we can do a couple of different things with it. Real quick, towards the bottom here, you see send to Onyx Hunt. That is, since I took this range, I can send it to Onyx. It'll send it to the Onyx mapping system, and I can basically, I use the compass, point my phone towards where I ranged, and it takes that range distance, and then you can drop a pin. So you shoot an animal, it's really whatever, you're gonna get over there in the dark or whatever, you can set a pin to more easily find it, which is nice. And then below that is gun, and that's gonna say, this gun that I have set up in here right now is 7PRC with a suppressor on it. To the right, you're going to see Applied Ballistics logo with a range card. To the right of that is a little crosshair button. And what that is doing is when I am validating my data. So the first thing I do, I shoot at 100 yards, get a really good 100-yard zero. As I'm doing that, I have my chronograph, so I'm getting my speed. So when I input everything into my ballistic profile, kind of everything is there. And then I step it right out to like 500 yards. We have a 500-yard plate, so it's easy to step out just to that distance. Get out there and I shoot, and the distance isn't really, maybe let's just say I'm low, 2 inches. So, and with that, we're gonna hit muzzle velocity, and it's actually, instead of adjusting, it is gonna adjust our muzzle velocity a little bit, but it's gonna ask us if our placement was high or low. So we're gonna say it was low, and we are gonna say in what distance units. Inches is the easiest. And we'll say 6 inches, we'll confirm, and it's gonna actually adjust our muzzle velocity to match that at distance. Then, within your rangefinder little tab icon that we have in this section that we have here, we have another gear icon in the top right hand corner, which actually goes to your rangefinder. You can toggle through all of the same things that we went through in our rangefinder. And if we toggle through them on here, it is going to change them in your rangefinder as well. One thing that can happen is the circle or your reticle that you have can be off of where your laser or where that signal is actually going out at. And with this rangefinder, you can actually align them. So if they're a little bit off, You can go to something like a telephone pole and run it up and see exactly on that telephone pole where you're getting the most consistent reading. And then within this rangefinder settings on your app, you can go in and you can say reticle alignment mode, and it'll actually let you shift the reticle in here over to where the beam is actually shooting out. So just something else that is very customizable, and just, you know, for extra precision, especially for like you know, long range shooters, competition shooters, that might be really important to you. I'm gonna go back. One more down is sights, and that is if you have a BDX scope. We do not, so we're gonna go back up to custom profiles. And this is where you are going to build a profile. So let's just say I'm gonna go to the flare here. This is what it looks like. We can go to profile gun. I'm gonna input what I want the gun to be called, and this is what it's gonna be called in the rangefinder as well. But we can go down into like the bullet library. Right next to the library, there's a few shells looking icon. You can click that, and this is where you can go through and select. So 6.5 is 264, and we're gonna go down. The bullets that we were using were actually Sierras. They were the 130 grain Match King, or they're Tip Game King actually. So we can hit that. The drag model, go with the G7. That said, if your bullet is not in the library, go with the ballistic coefficient. You can manually input it, but make sure that that is set to the ballistic coefficient that it says on the box. Your firearm is different. This is where you're gonna have to manually input. So muzzle velocity, either off the box that you're shooting. The best way to do it is to get a chronograph. I have a little Garmin Zero chronograph, and I get my muzzle velocities with that. Input that average. Make sure you get your twist rate in there correctly, your twist direction. Then your zero range. The program works best if your zero range is set to 100 yards instead of 200. So zero range at 100, make sure you zero that at 100 yards. And then we've got our zero height, offset, sight height. We just leave those other two at 0, but our sight height, we want to measure from the barrel to the middle of our scope. That's gonna give us our sight height. And then our scope, I never change this other stuff. The holdover units is important. We wanna make sure that that matches our scope. So if our scope is mils, we wanna make sure it's set at MRAD. If it's MOA, we wanna make sure it's set at MOA. All that needs to jive. And then the muzzle velocity temp table, I'd never touch that either. Once that is in there, you can come back to your whole library. So you have your profile 1, 2, 3, 4. Then beside that, there's a little open circle that you can tap and untap to either select it or not. That is where you select the profiles that you want to go into your rangefinder. Once you have those selected, you can hit sync in the top and make sure your rangefinder's on, and then it'll sync all of those profiles over, and you can go into the settings to ballistic profiles and see that they're all there. All right, so that is settings and kind of setup run through of 10K, 8K rangefinders from SIG. If you have any questions, let me know. This can be very daunting. There's a lot of settings and there's a lot of things. Take my advice, make it simple as you can. Get your system set up, verify it at distance, get a really good zero, validate at distance, and then just like, you know, trust your system. Validate it wherever you're going, but just trust your system.